quitting in 3 days. I don't want a ceasefire.
It's no secret that Donald Trump is not a fan of Volodymyr Zelensky. And don't take our word for it. Just check out their meeting last Friday. It was the opposite of cordial. They stopped short of punching each other.
Remember when Ukraine was the David standing up to Russia's Goliath?
The sheer heroism of the Ukrainian people, who are determined not to let their freedom go, even though it's a David and Goliath sort of battle. Although, fingers crossed, we know how that one turned out, don't we?
The world was inspired, billions poured in, and the country was hailed as a symbol of resilience. Fast forward a few years, and now Ukraine is less of a warrior and more like that one friend who always needs to borrow money, but never seems to pay you back. If Ukraine had a GoFundMe, it'd be the biggest in history. And guess what? You've already donated whether you wanted to or not. The U.S. and EU have sent over $200 billion in aid, but where is it all going?
Top focus on gravitas, one of the countries that is deeply dependent on American aid. We're talking about Ukraine. It cannot account for roughly $200 billion in U.S. aid.
And more importantly, how much longer can this last before Western taxpayers start asking for a refund? Let's break it down, how Ukraine went from global hero to a nation running on borrowed time. At the start of the war, Ukraine was the world's underdog. The country was fighting against impossible odds, and the West rushed in with support money, weapons, and non-stop applause. Zelensky went from TV comedian to wartime leader, making dramatic speeches in front of Congress, the EU, and even the Grammys. Yes, really. So far, Ukraine has received over $200 billion from the U.S. and EU.
Ukraine's president beseeching the U.S. for more military aid before that cash runs out at the end of the year, making his case in D.C. on Tuesday in a last-second pitch to Congress to approve more funding in the war against Russia.
To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of some countries. And while a big chunk of it went to weapons, another massive portion went to, well, we're not exactly sure. Even U.S. politicians have asked, are we tracking this? And Ukraine. They're basically saying, don't worry about it, bro, just send more. When a friend lends you money, they expect it back. When a country lends you billions, they expect influence. The West isn't just writing checks, they're buying stakes in Ukraine's future, one non-repayable loan at a time. And let's be real, how does a war-torn country pay back that much money? Hint, they don't. It's not just about Ukraine, it's about Russia, NATO, and global power.
You wouldn't have NATO right now if I weren't there. And your previous Secretary General has said that. He said he's never seen anything like it. When I came to NATO, when I first had my first meeting, I noticed that people weren't paying their bills at all.
If the West pulls the plug, Ukraine collapses. If they keep funding, their own economies take a hit. It's a lose-lose situation, but for now, they keep swiping the credit card. War is tragic, but war is also big business. While Ukraine fights for survival, defense contractors in the US and Europe are making record profits. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, these guys are cashing in, and they'd love for this conflict to last a little longer. We've seen this before. First, it's unwavering support, billions in aid, weapons, training, the whole package. Then people back home start asking, wait, how much are we spending on this? Sound familiar? Afghanistan got 20 years of US backing until one day,
on my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
The plug was pulled and chaos took over. If Ukraine doesn't plan for life beyond Western aid, history might just repeat itself. And not in a good way. At first, foreign aid was Ukraine's lifeline, like a friend spotting you rent when times are tough. But now, it's starting to look more like an allowance that never stops. Every budget, every payroll, every battle Western money is keeping the lights on. The problem? No one knows how to turn off the tap without everything collapsing. Can Ukraine break free and stand on its own? Or has it become too dependent to survive without a financial IV drip for a while? Sending billions to Ukraine felt like the right thing to do. But now? Even Uncle Sam is checking his wallet and wondering where all the money went. With rising inflation, layoffs, and national debt soaring, Americans are asking, why are we funding a war abroad when people here can't afford groceries? And with elections coming up, politicians are getting nervous. If voters start seeing Ukraine as a bottomless pit, that money stream might dry up faster than anyone expects. At first, Europe was all in waving Ukrainian flags, sending billions, promising to stand by Ukraine no matter what.
European Union leaders have been joined by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for crisis talks aimed at boosting Europe's defense spending and shoring up support for Ukraine.
But now energy bills are sky high, inflation is biting, and taxpayers are wondering, wait, how much have we sent again? Governments are struggling to keep their own economies afloat while still writing checks for Ukraine. Protests are breaking out, politicians are backpedaling, and suddenly, the blank check policy isn't looking so sustainable. So the big question, how much longer before Europe quietly closes its wallet? What happens when the safety net disappears? For years, Ukraine has leaned on Western aid like a lifeline, but lifelines aren't forever. Rebuilding cities, fixing the economy, and keeping the military strong all costs billions. But with U.S. elections coming and Europe facing its own financial struggles, that endless support might be running out. If the West pulls back, does Ukraine have a plan? Or is it about to face its toughest battle, yet the fight to survive on its own? Survival isn't free. Every missile, every tank, every loaf of bread in a war-torn country has a price tag. And for Ukraine, that bill has been covered by the U.S. and Europe so far. But what happens when the donors get donation fatigue? War doesn't pause for budget cuts, and Ukraine is stuck in a fight where running out of money is just as dangerous as running out of ammunition. Ukraine's funding isn't just about money, it's about politics. One side says support them at all costs. The other says charity has limits. And stuck in the middle, Ukraine waiting to see if the next check clears. With elections coming up and economic stress rising, the political will to keep the money flowing is fading fast. The question is, when push comes to shove, will Ukraine still be a priority? Being a hero comes with a price. In 2022, Ukraine was the world's symbol of resistance, David standing against Goliath.
The Bible tells us the story of David, who slew the giant Goliath. President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is leading a defiant nation in this David and Goliath battle.
But wars aren't just fought on the battlefield. They're fought in bank accounts, too. With mounting debt, dwindling resources, and a front line that keeps stretching, Ukraine is learning the hard way that global admiration doesn't pay the bills. So, how long can a nation keep fighting when its war chest is running dry? The West came in strong billions in weapons, aid, and promises of victory. But now, the cracks are showing. Americans are questioning the price tag. European nations are pulling back. And behind closed doors, world leaders are asking, how much longer can we afford this? When politics, inflation, and war fatigue collide, Ukraine might find itself facing a reality it never planned for standing alone. War is hell, but for some, it's also big business. While Ukraine fights for survival, arms manufacturers and defense contractors are cashing in. The U.S. has sent over $40 billion in military aid, and guess where a lot of that money goes?
President Zelensky posted a tweet overnight thanking House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and other lawmakers for approving a $40 billion aid package for Ukraine. If this passes, what would it do for Ukraine in its fight against Russia?
Not to Ukrainian soldiers, but to companies making weapons. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and others are reporting record profits. So, is this about saving Ukraine? Or fueling an industry that thrives on conflict? Remember when Ukraine dominated every headline? Social media was flooded with flags, world leaders made emotional speeches. But now? It's just another background story. The brutal truth is the world moves on. Wars don't end when attention fades, but support does. And with that, Ukraine is left wondering, how do you win a war when the world has stopped watching? History tells us one thing: when the West pulls out, they pull out fast. Afghanistan, Vietnam, even Syria, the pattern is the same. And now, with growing pressure to focus on problems at home, Ukraine could be next. What happens if one day the West just says, "We're done," and walks away? Is Ukraine prepared for that moment? Or is the country being set up for an even bigger fall? Ukraine's war isn't just on the battlefield, it's in bank accounts, in political speeches, and in the fading attention of the world. The West has written the checks, but for how much longer? History shows that support comes fast and disappears even faster. And when that moment comes, will Ukraine rise from the ashes or be left as just another chapter in the book of abandoned allies? Because in war, survival isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when you're truly on your own.